Hello, and welcome to TruceTalk, the podcast where we discuss how using the power of hypnosis can help us find congruence between the mind, the body, and the spirit as we explore the mind's potential and the intersection of psychology and spirituality on our quest for inner peace. I'm your host, Lindsay, a certified clinical hypnotherapist. In this episode, we embark on a voyage through time. A voyage propelled not by sails or engines, but by the sheer force of words. These syllables, carefully chosen and passionately delivered, have ignited revolutions, moved hearts, and left indelible marks on the tapestry of human existence. So, fasten your mental seatbelts, for we are about to explore how mere breaths, crafted into sentences, have shaped nations, altered destinies, and echoed across centuries. Ready? Let us step into the grand theater of rhetoric, where orators become architects of change. And because we know this to be true and factual, I feel it only fitting that here is where I insert the trigger warning. What you're about to hear, depending on your perspective and what you wish to learn from this podcast, if anything, you may experience one of the 5 basic emotions: fear, anger, panic, grief, and joy. If you do not wish to experience one or all or any combination of these emotions or any of their derivatives, then please do not listen to this podcast episode. Now, the beautiful thing about hypnosis is that it doesn't matter if this is your first time listening to an episode or your 25th time. You can always start from where you are with hypnosis. So when you listen to this episode, let's go all the way back into time when you were small, and just start with a beginner's mind. It's often been said, and you may have even heard it yourself, that the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Now, from a hypnosis perspective, hypnosis begins at the dinner table. You may remember seeing commercials back in the day of a mom or a dad with a child in a high chair, and they're trying to feed the child baby food, and they start singing little songs and flying the little spoon of this baby food around in the air. The bumblebee flew out the barn, buzzing and buzzing all over the farm. Zzz, you know how it goes. Well, having had a mother who raised 7 warriors who served proudly and honorably in the United States military. Each one, she explained to us before they went off to foreign lands. At our dinner table, she always said, "The hand that rocks the cradle rules a nation and its politics." Keep that in mind as you are listening to this podcast episode, and as you're listening to other sources of media out in the world as you go about your merry way. And if you're not careful, you may notice the language patterns still resonating from times like the 1960s, when the influential Republican figure that left us with memorable quotes that continue to resonate still echoes across the airwaves today. Extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. This bold declaration from his acceptance speech at the 1964 Republican National Convention encapsulates his unwavering conservatism. And those who seek absolute power, even though they seek it to do what they regard as good, are simply demanding the right to enforce their own version of heaven on earth. He warned against the dangers of unchecked authority. And a woman has a right to an abortion. That's a decision that's up to the pregnant woman, not up to the Pope or some do-gooders or the religious right. His stance on individual freedom and separation of church and state remains relevant. And then he said, the conservative movement is founded on the simple tenet that people have the right to live life as they please, as long as they don't hurt anyone else in the process. He emphasized personal liberty. And then he said, government governs the best when it governs least, and stays out of the impossible task of legislating morality. He advocated for limited government intervention. These quotes reflect the speaker's commitment to his principles, individual rights, and separation of religion and politics. And lately, depending on where you are in the world, if you're listening to the world news, you'll hear this speaker's name thrown around lately. But it's just like saffron, the most expensive per gram spice that you can find on the market these days. It's expensive when you use it But just like saffron, a little bit goes a long way. Now, as you are experiencing whichever combination of the 5 emotions we discussed earlier, as those statements that he made echo in your mind, and you decide whether or not you want to continue listening to this podcast episode or not. Consider this. The speaker lived from 1909 to 1998 and was an American politician and Major General in the Air Force Reserve. He was born in Phoenix, Arizona, and he helped manage his family's department store. And during World War II, he flew aircrafts between the U.S. and India. And he also served in the Phoenix City Council. He was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1952. He rejected the New Deal legacy and fought against the New Deal coalition. He challenged his party's moderate to liberal wing on policy issues, supported the Civil Rights Act of 1957 and 1960, but opposed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It was in 1964 he mobilized a large conservative constituency and won the Republican nomination for president. His acceptance speech emphasized freedom, limited government, and constitutional principles. His famous line, "Extremism and the defense of liberty is no vice." And despite losing to Lyndon B. Johnson, he left a lasting impact on conservative politics with his language patterns. He returned to the Senate in 1969, specializing in defense and foreign policy. He urged President Nixon to resign during the Watergate scandal, and he advocated for social and cultural libertarian views. Be sure to leave a comment if you've heard his name before, or if the sound of his name gives you any type of an emotional or physiological feeling. Barry Morris Goldwater, the 1964 Republican presidential nominee, employed distinctive language patterns that left a lasting impact on the American political discourse. Let's delve into these hypnotic language patterns. Bold conservatism. In his acceptance speech at the 1964 Republican National Convention, Goldwater boldly declared, "Extremism and the defense of liberty is no vice." And let me remind you also that moderation and the pursuit of justice is no virtue. These words, among the most controversial ever uttered at the mainstream political convention, resonated with his loyal followers, but dismayed more moderate Republicans. And because of his use of reconstitutive rhetoric, Goldwater's discourse was transformative. His rhetoric moved the boundary of present-day political discourse to the right. He consistently reiterated his message before sympathetic audiences, coalescing and enduring conservative audience. His enduring impact, although Goldwater lost the 1964 election to Lyndon Johnson, his candidacy and rhetoric shifted the political landscape. His ideological worldview crystallized, summoning participation in a countercultural movement that rejected the progressive agenda of the 1960s. But he talked about family, and he said something one time about they're coming for your family. Who is they? And what did he mean by that? It seems as though language patterns have a 50-year cycle before they resurface again. And the interesting thing about reel-to-reels is that they're made of cellulose, and they don't last very long. They're brittle. So take a deep and slow breath in through your nose, fill in your belly, your rib cage, and your chest, and exhale through your mouth, letting your chest go down, your rib cage go down, and your belly go flat as I thread up the reel-to-reel, and we listen in.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I keep looking over here at the notes of the man who preceded me. It says one ham. I think I'm going to hide that. I don't know how I got away with not being given away. It's really wonderful to be back here again. In fact, as I've often remarked throughout my life, it's been my experience that every disagreeable or disappointing thing that one goes through in life, one finds a silver lining. I don't look upon the campaign of last year as a disagreeable or disappointing thing. I enjoyed every single moment of it, and if I had to do it again, which I hope I never have to, I wouldn't have done it any different way. But out of it has come this great silver lining of my being able to be back home. And I don't think you really can understand what this means unless you've been away from home for nearly 20 years and suddenly have the opportunity to once again live in sort of freedom, live the way one was used to before war and politics intervened. And it's wonderful to come back to Yuma. I know the old-timers here get sick and tired of my recitation of the fact that my family started in this county over 100 years ago. In fact, almost 115 years ago. I know they get sick and tired of hearing me talk about the closeness of Yuma to all of us in the Goldwater family, but it's a fact and we're going to keep on saying it whether you like it or not. And the fact that I've done pretty good down here voting-wise has prompts me to keep it up, even though I don't know what I'm going to run for the next time except precinct committeeman. You know, this last campaign was an interesting one. I had really looked forward to the debates that I thought we were bound to have, which didn't come around. In fact, they wound up being a series of barbecues. And it got down to a race as to who would get the Tums or the Alka-Seltzer first. I never did find out what the president was barbecuing down there at the ranch, but my spies tell me that it wore glasses, something like this. But we had a good time. I was trying during this last campaign to get the same message across that I've been trying to get across ever since I first got into politics in an elective way. And that is my concern about the rapidly growing power of the federal government. I don't mean the bigness of the federal government, because when you have to govern 194 million people, you can't do it with a small body of people. And when this number grows to 200 or 225 or 300 million people, the number of people who work for our government will necessarily have to be larger. But I argue that it is not necessary, as the population grows and the number of people in the government grow, that the power we give to them has to grow in the same way or even in a disproportionate way, which it's doing today. This, I think, is coming across more and more to the American people. In fact, an interesting thing about this campaign was that in the last 2 weeks, a poll was taken by a man who is not normally inclined towards the Republican Party, Mr. Lou Harris, and he came up with the startling information that 88% of the American people are concerned with the growing concentration of power in Washington. Now, the question immediately comes to all of our minds who are Republicans and conservative Democrats: why, if this is the case, didn't these people register their concern on the ballots on November the 3rd? We know they didn't. I always said that, I know many of the Republicans in this room have heard me say, when I lose an election, I really want to lose it. But I didn't mean it that bad. I was up in Apache County yesterday, and here's a good friend of mine lost by 74 votes. And another one in Navajo County lost by 304 votes. Now, if losing an election like that's disturbing, because you keep waking up at nights and it's like you miss a 1-foot putt or make the wrong bid. You never forget it. And you keep wondering, who were the rascals that didn't get out of bed and vote? I haven't got enough time to worry about it. In fact, the other night, Peggy and I were watching television, and this commercial came on and said 26 million people have switched their headache powder. And I said, what in the world could give 26 million people a headache? And then I remembered. So I'm going to be wakening during the nights. The figure is exactly 27,140,000. And I'm getting sick of being downgraded to 26. But I'll be worrying a long time about why, when people are concerned in their hearts and their minds about the concentration of government in Washington, the taking of government away from the city and the county of Yuma, away from the state of Arizona, transferring it to Washington, why couldn't they put that expression on the ballot? And I have to come to the very regretful decision that maybe the American people can't recognize how this power is being transferred. Maybe they're basing their fear on the actual creation of our Constitution, which, as you recall, was written to create a government that would protect the freedoms that were given to us as an endowment from our Creator. To set up a government that would never be able to find power concentrated in it. A government so divided that they didn't even trust the legislative branch. And they divided that in two. And then divided the Senate into three parts and had the House run every 2 years just to make sure that objectionable people could be gotten rid of and preferable people could be kept. And we created the judicial branch just to judge the constitutionalities of laws and the administration of these laws, not to enact legislation themselves, as we found them doing lately, but to merely pass on what the other two bodies were doing. And then the executive or the administrative branch to administer the laws passed, to execute foreign policy, determine foreign policy, and to do the things charged to it by the Constitution. I think that maybe Americans remember the teachings of their school days and are fearful, as they hear this subject discussed, that there might be a concentration of power in Washington. Maybe we haven't explained it. Maybe we conservatives have talked too much in the wrong direction, talked too much generality instead of being too specific. But I mentioned, for example, just one area, the area of the Supreme Court, and we all have great reverence for the idea of the Supreme Court. We know that throughout our history we've had courts that some judge good and some judge bad, and they've gone up and down in these judgments. But I don't remember a court before that has taken unto itself the job of reconstructing our whole Constitution through their judicial powers. And it's against this that we who are concerned throw our gauntlet, because if these 9 men can tell the state of Arizona, for example, how to reapportion their legislature and tell the other 49 states how to do the same thing without having any charge to do this by Constitution or by law or by precedent, what's to prevent them in the guise of social progress to make any changes in the Constitution or our way of life that they want to? This is a concentration of power that we never thought would happen. But now we find out that it can happen if we're not too careful in the appointments that are made to the courts, not only the Supreme Court, but the courts throughout the land. 88% of the Americans agree, as of the 2 weeks before the election, and I think now more would agree, that there's too much power leaving the people, too much power going to Washington. People say to me, you speak of this, but what are your examples? What freedoms have we lost through this movement of power? I can mention a few. 30% of the money that you make, you have no control over how it's spent. Now, I'm not saying that you would have control over 100%, but when 30% becomes the minimum, and this graduates to 90%, that the government controls the spending of, I would say this is a rather sizable loss of freedom. When you have to work from January the 1st until April the 4th for the federal government, and then work another month or so for the other governments, I would say that you've lost quite a bit of freedom of choice. I think you farmers know what I'm speaking about when I speak of loss of freedom. I don't think that 30% of the American farmers can say today with any feeling of sureness that they operate their farms with complete freedom. They aren't able to grow what they want in the quantities that they want, receive the prices they think they should receive. The cattleman of this country is beset today by the loss of freedom created by the government trying to operate the segment of the free market in grains that the cattleman must depend upon if he's going to make a profit or not. These are the little things that have happened. These are the little things that have happened to only segments of our population. And I could go on at quite some length in reciting where freedoms have been lost. But let's think of some things that are coming on, things that have been resisted by the entire American population. And yet today, either through a lack of understanding of what the result can be, or possibly having been finally sold on it, or possibly having reached the point where, oh, why fight them anymore? Today in our Congress, we have two pieces of legislation that have been fought and resisted successfully by the Republican Party and by conservative Democrats for years and years. One concerns itself with elementary education, the other with medical care for the aged. Now, we conservatives are immediately attacked as we oppose federal action in these fields with having no feeling for the education of our children. We have a great feeling. That's why we're concerned. They say then at the other end of the ladder, you have no concern for the elderly people of this country. We have. That's why we don't want to see this phony thing passed on the American people. Let me try to explain a bit about this federal aid to elementary education. And let me say at the outset that there's been federal aid to education for 165 or more years, given to colleges across this country in the form of goods, services, and money to the tune of about $4 billion, both to parochial schools and private schools and public colleges. And there's no question in my mind that this is a good thing and that there can be no control exercised over a college to the extent that it would be harmful to the students and harmful to education. But when you get into this area of elementary education, you're getting into something mighty close to the hearts of the family. And if there's one unit in America that to all of our minds establishes America as a great country, it's the family. And we must resist every move that will tend to weaken the family unit. This is one of the reasons that we conservatives in both parties have opposed federal aid to elementary education. You and I as parents have a responsibility to see to it that our children are educated through high school. We have not a responsibility but a desire to see them educated through college. They may not want to be educated through college, and if they don't, that's their own business. We may not be able to afford it. If we can't, there are ample ways today for every American child who wants to go to college to go to college. But the area from the kindergarten to college belongs to parents. And once we give the federal government this responsibility, once it's turned over to them for one moment, you'll never get it back. And this will be the attitude within a few years. Well, I don't have to worry about Johnny and Mary's education. There's a federal agent in town who's heading up the local educational organizations. They're going to decide the qualifications of teachers, the books, the text, and the things that our children are going to study. Now, you may say this isn't going to happen. I was the ranking minority member of the Labor and Public Welfare Committee that for years wrestled with this problem. During the few years that the Republican Party had the Congress, I was chairman of the subcommittee on education. And I can tell you this, if we could have written a bill that would have turned money back to the states for educational purposes without any strings attached, without any controls, we would have written that bill. In fact, night after night, the conservatives on that committee sat trying to figure out ways that money could be shifted back to the states so that elementary schools could be benefited, particularly in a state like Arizona, where nearly 80% of the people live in 2 counties, where that much percentage is collected in sales tax, where the bulk of the money has to go back to, and leaving the counties outside of the 2 big counties rather hard put to find enough money to provide adequate elementary education, although you've all always done a wonderful job in this field. We couldn't come up with an answer because the Constitution and the Supreme Court would prevent your national legislature ever giving money just willy-nilly back to the states. Oh, we can give it to the countries around the world. That's all right. But you can't give it back to the states. And that's a matter of Constitution, and it's a matter of judgment by the Supreme Court. This is one of our worries. The other is the controls that I've been mentioning. Controls that are bound to come as years go on. We write these laws sometimes for temporary relief, and we try carefully not to put controls in, but we have to put them in. Then along comes an election year when it seems advantageous to write a little more control in, so we do. And the day comes, 10, 15, maybe 5 years, when there are enough controls written into the Educational Act that we do away with PTAs, we do away with county boards, we do away with the state superintendent of instruction, and all elementary education is supervised by Washington. And get back to the original thought, we parents are relieved of our responsibility to our children. Now we go to the other end of this ladder, because this is the other piece of legislation now before this Congress that I feel is detrimental to the future of freedom, freedom of choice, many freedoms. And this is a bill carrying one of the most beautiful names that anybody ever dreamed up, Medicare. Whoever dreamed that one up ought to be given a blue ribbon. It's a real fine word. It sounds like mother love or free beer or wide roads. More water. You can't, it's hard to be against it. But when we look at it, we begin to strip it away, and I don't want to sound political. It's a phony piece of legislation in that it only will get you in the hospital. No medicine, no doctors. Now, if I ever have to go to a hospital, I'd like the doctor to stick his nose in once in a while and say, Goldwater, how you getting along? And when I needed a little shot of something or a pill, I'd like a nurse, whether she's pretty or not, to come in and give me a shot or give me a pill. I just don't want to be stretched out there under federal care without anything happening to me. But this... Now, this is the phoniness of it. But now let's look at the real serious
Now,
side of it.
although these words were spoken over a half a century ago, they still pack quite a punch, don't they? Because you see, when it comes to language patterns, it does not matter what your views are politically or what side of the scale you sit. But what's important is to recognize the fact that the words were carefully crafted, selected, chosen to evoke a particular response from your nervous system. Remember that. Because if you step away and separate facts from emotions, as I tell all of my clients to do in any situation, the same pattern always emerges. In elementary writing, the simple format is tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Now, as you take in another deep and slow breath, releasing any tension that you may have, while I splice up the reel to reel, and we listen in to the next set of language patterns.
We've already talked about the possible loss of responsibility of the parent to their children. What about the other side of that coin? How about the responsibility of you young people to parents? I'd like to think that when I get to be 65 or 70, I'm not going to slow down any. I might not need it, but if I needed it, I don't want to go banging on the door of some bureaucrat. I want my sons and daughters to come along and say, Dad, you took care of us, we'll take care of you. Because if we say to them as they grow up, kids, you don't have to worry about the old man, the old lady. Uncle Sam's going to take care of them. You just go ahead and have a ball. We'll take care of them. Where's the family? Our responsibility as parents gone. The responsibility of the young gone. We're no longer a family unit. And I can't imagine anything that communists would rather have than the great power, the concrete strength of the American families ripped apart like that. Now, I don't say that this administration or the others who have proposed these propositions have that intent, but it's the end result. But then let's look at the freedom part of it. In England today, they tell me that a doctor under socialized medicine can spend 3 minutes with a patient. I'm very fortunate. I've never had many aches and pains. But when I get one, I get kind of scared. And if any doctor tries to get rid of me in 3 minutes, he's going to have trouble. But what else can you do? When you've lost the doctor of your choice, you've lost the hospital of your choice, the doctors have all been put in pretty much the same level. What doctor's going to try to improve his techniques and his skills by going back to school and studying when he knows he can't earn anymore? When there's no more reward, not even the reward of knowing that a job has been well done in medicine because he's been recognized by his fellows. This is what England is going through. But you say Medicare doesn't provide this. Oh, no, not this year. You have to be 65, and it has to come out of Social Security. We'll disregard the fact that France's Social Security system is going bankrupt because of Medicare having been added to it. We'll forget all about that. But we can't forget the fact that once the foot's in the door, you and I know politicians well enough to know that come the next election, some fellow's going to say, I'm going to have a hard time getting reelected. We better put the 60-year-olds in, and we better give them a bottle of sleeping pills when they want it. And the next time it's the 50s. And then somebody gets up that's real smart, and he says, let's really look at this thing. We can all remember when we got married in our 20s, and that was the toughest period of our lives because we were creating families, beginning to raise them, and we didn't have any money. Oh, we bring them in under Medicare. And the first thing you know, we have socialized medicine in America. We have mediocre medicine in America, where today we have the finest medicine in America for every person in this country that needs it. Not everybody needs it, but people who need it. And when people say to me, hundreds, thousands of people over 65 are being denied hospital care and doctor care, I say to them, what have you done about it? Have you tried to help one of those people? And universally the answer is no. It's the job of the federal government. When we do this, we are taking away freedoms. When we do this, we are paving the road down which our government can go to a completely dominated, centralized government from which there will be no returning. Because once we taste the niceties of something for nothing, we're not liable to give them up. Now you might say, but you object to these, what are the alternatives? I think we have wonderful alternatives. In education, I, together with others, offered a bill 8 years ago that would have allowed a tax credit of up to $100, not over that, but up to $100 for anything that you paid on your local school taxes. This would have meant 3 billion staying home. Well, you know what the first objection was from the people in the Congress who read this bill and debated with me about it in committee and on the floor? Who's going to control how those people spend the $3 billion? And this is the root of the trouble. They hate to see this money stay home. They want it because they can control the spending. I said, well, I think the people at home have pretty good sense. I said, in my own hometown, we need a new sewer system. It's worth about $170 million. We don't need any new schools this year or next year. Let's build a sewer system. But they never could come to agreement on it. But the highest flattery I ever had was when Senator Ribicoff of Connecticut took my bill, ran on it as a liberal, and got elected. And then... And then darn near got it through the Senate. We only missed getting it through by one vote. There's an answer. It's a perfectly logical, simple, understandable answer. Let the people at home decide how they're going to spend this money. If they need it for schools, they'll spend it for schools. If they need it for roads or streets, they'll spend it for those things. But let them decide. And on the care of the aged in medicine, nearly 90% of the American people are covered with private plans. I would say that we never will get them completely covered. We might wind up with 4 or 5% uncovered. Then it becomes a job of the local agencies. If they won't do it, the state, if they won't do it, the federal government has to do it. But they don't have to start out by assuming that there are no people over 65 in this country who can take care of themselves. And I'm very happy to relate this little thing to you, that in the areas of the United States where there are the greatest concentrations of retired people over 65 living mostly off Social Security or plans derived from corporate structure or from bargaining by unions, Dick Nixon won 7-3. I even beat Dick, because these people want no part of a plan that can destroy their income from Social Security. We say we have the Kerr-Mills plan, which the state is now debating. The state has to agree to take it. The state pays a third, the federal government pays a third, and you pay a third. They say it's voluntary. It's not really, because whether you take it or not, your income taxes are going to pay part of it. But we have that offer, we have that suggestion. The private plan, more encouragement for private plans, or the Kerr-Mills approach, or now the American Medical Association approach, which would be paid out of the general tax fund, not overburdening the Social Security fund. Now, I have one more little thing that I did want to discuss with you briefly, especially you Arizonans, and any of you from other states I'm sure this will apply to. Because this, again, is an illustration of a loss of freedom, and a loss of a freedom that I feel will eventually be of extreme detriment to all the people in this country. And this is what we call reapportionment. I'm speaking of the Supreme Court decision last year that the state legislatures in this country must reapportion on a one-vote, one-man proposition. An idea, I might say, discarded by the Founding Fathers because they knew it would be impractical. They knew it was a sort of a philosophical approach to Greek democracy, which has never worked in the history of the country. But here came the Supreme Court without one word in the Constitution to back it up, without one word of the law to back it up, and they say to the state of Arizona, the way you've been running your legislature since 1912 is wrong. You have to reapportion. Now, to you Arizonans, to you humans, 80% of our people, or nearly 80%, live in 2 counties. This will be where the senators and the members of the House come from. I would imagine, and I don't know just what they're going to come up with because there's quite a hassle on it, that you might find Yuma County, Mojave County, part of Pinal, and Santa Cruz County, for example, having maybe 2 senators, maybe only 1, maybe 2 or 3 members of the House. Some people may not see any harm in this. I can tell you this, that the people we get in legislative bodies that do the most damage come from the heavily concentrated areas of population, whether they be in Arizona or the nation. And this is the nature of the beast. This is where you find the great concentrations of the minority groups of all kinds. I'm not speaking of race, creed, or color, but the whole ball of wax, large enough to have political voting power to put their people in office. These people don't always go into office with the best interests of the state or the nation in their hearts. They go with the best interests of the group they represent. And again, this is natural. You would expect it to be. But what about the smaller counties population-wise in our state, who will no longer have a control, as we have today, with 2 senators from each county, who will no longer be properly represented as a minority against the majority that will be concentrated in the 2 largest counties? Even if we rebuild the Senate to have a greater membership, rebuild the House to have a greater membership, we will find this being true. I would suggest to you people in Yuma County that you get in touch with your senators and your legislators, and you happen to have a very powerful senator, and discuss with them the dangers that you see in this. There are some very important questions coming in the years ahead before the state legislature. Questions of water, water apportionment, water fairness, for example, that we are all interested in this state, and particularly down here in this county. How are these going to be decided when the smaller counties aren't adequately represented? I think this is something that all Arizonans should be concerned with. I think the legislature has been too long in beginning to suggest proper remedies for this, and while I have no more right than any Arizona citizen to suggest, I would suggest a strong position on it. I would suggest a reading of the Connecticut position, of the New Jersey position, which states clearly that they don't feel the Supreme Court has any right to dip its hand into the way that any state develops its legislature. I don't care if it's New Hampshire, one of the smallest states with the 3rd largest legislative body in the world, or Arizona, one of the largest states geographically with one of the smallest legislative bodies in the world. That's our business. It's New Hampshire's business. It's not the business of the Supreme Court. It's not the business of the Constitution because it doesn't mention it. And I would suggest, in fact, I have written my colleagues in the Senate, the Republican colleagues, urging them to make it a Republican issue that a proper amendment to the Constitution be passed by that body so that Americans across this land can express themselves. And I'm not only concerned about my own state in this, I'm concerned about the other 49 states, and I'm concerned about the federal government, because the districting of the House of Representatives will be affected by this. And you will find your great concentrations of power resting in the great cities, whether they be east or west, north or south. These are the areas where you can more easily find, again, minority groups, well organized, of a basically selfish nature, who will send people to the Congress not interested in what happens to anybody else but to them. This isn't an across-the-board condemnation, because I know many of these people who represent not only their groups, but all groups as well, and the United States in particular. I would like to see, and I think most Americans would like to see, this court decision reversed by legislative action, if need be, or by amendment to the Constitution. And I wanted to close on that by pointing this out to you, I should say, as another example of how our freedoms are slowly but surely being tampered with by well-intentioned people, but misguided people, by people devoted to the destruction of our country as another group, or by people who just don't understand. And I'm afraid that too many Americans tonight just don't understand, as too many Arizonans just don't understand what will happen when we get lopsided legislatures. If this can prevail, what can stop the Supreme Court from deciding that the Senate of the United States should also be reapportioned. And we find New York and California, the two great states population-wise, with more senators than any 4 or 5 other states might have, and Arizona, Nevada, Idaho, Utah may be grouped together with one. Now, the Constitution's concept of a Senate was a body, a deliberate body, a body that would slow things down purposely, a body that would correct the foolish mistakes of the House. Now, unfortunately, and I say this sadly because I served 12 years in that body, the House of Representatives has to correct the foolish mistakes the Senate makes. And I don't want to see the Senate get in any worse condition than it is, to where they can make more foolish mistakes by not having equal representation from each of the 50 states. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to have you think by these remarks of mine tonight that I see no future to the solution of these problems. I do. I think that every problem that faces the American people can be solved within the confines of the Constitution. I think that every economic problem that faces the American people can be solved within the boundaries of the free enterprise system. I think the most important thing, though, is to remember that the solving of these problems, as desirable as they might be, have a desirable way to solve them and an undesirable way. And if they are solved in a way that results in the destruction of freedom, I suggest they're better off not being solved at that moment. I suggest that we wait. If they can be solved without harming freedom, then by all means, let's get it done. But freedom is the most important thing. I hear of the Great Society. It's, again, a great combination of words. We all like it. We'd like to think of our society as being greater. But in all of the discussion I've heard, I've yet to hear freedom discussed as one of the ingredients of the Great Society. And what in this punch bowl could be a more important ingredient than freedom? Because what difference does it make to you or to me if we have justice, if we don't have freedom? What difference does it make to you or to me if we have material wealth, if we don't have freedom? What difference does it make to you and to me if we have peace without freedom? I suggest that in the jails we find peace, no freedom. We find justice in our jails, but we don't find freedom. We can find justice, some justice in the communist creed, but we find no freedom. So I want to leave you with this one thought, that the dedication of the Republican Party and of Jeffersonian and Jacksonian Democrats should constantly be to the preservation and the perpetuation and the enlargement of freedom amongst our own people and the people of the world. If we dedicate ourselves to this, all of us, then this will become a great society, a greater society. The world will become a great society, and the world will become a place of peace. But we are down to the point now where the argument is between freedom and slavery. And we have to admit tonight that the forces of slavery are slowly but surely defeating the forces of freedom. This needn't be, because we have all the strengths man needs. We have the strength of God. We have the strength of our material, our military strength. We have our economic strength. We have our political strength. And we have the strength of freedom. And if freedom in this world goes down the drain, it will be because people who lived in our generation and who lived in our times didn't care enough to learn what our government is doing against freedom or for freedom, and to speak out for it or against it. Again, it's been a real pleasure for me to be here. I want to get back early tonight to Phoenix, because tomorrow morning I have to go down and pay my respects to a grocer friend of mine who has shown great adaptability. It's one of the things I like about the Westerner. He never gets stumped. On November the 4th, the day after election, this fellow had 6,000 cans of a drink called Goldwater. And you know what he did? He piled them up into a big pyramid. And right on top, he put a sign. It said, "In your hearts, you know it's ginger ale." So I want to get back to it.
as you become more and more aware of your surroundings. Take in a deep and slow breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. Fill your belly, your rib cage, and your chest. And now exhale. Let your chest go down, and then your rib cage, and then your belly go flat. At the beginning, we discussed that you would experience an emotion. Now, regardless of whether or not you agree with anything that the subject speaker was saying, focus on the lesson of the language patterns. If you experienced anything, then you understand how powerful language patterns can be and how it's important that before you react to a news headline or a news broadcast or a tweet or any other form of headline breaking news notification, wait 3 heartbeats. Breathe. And then separate the facts from the emotions. And understand, what is it that the speaker is wanting you to do after listening to them? Remember, thoughts come from words. Words affect thoughts. Thoughts affect your organs. So breathe. Until next time. You've been listening to TruceTalk, hypnotic language patterns and political speeches that shaped a nation. I'm Lindsay, your certified clinical hypnotherapy instructor. Thanking you for listening, liking, sharing, and subscribing.